Hey man, will you stop there? Ma'am, step away from that car right now, or I will make you.
Officer, this is my car. I have the keys right here in my hand, and my registration is in the glove box if you'll...
Do not reach for anything. I don't care what's in your hand. Put it down and step back.
Sir, if you'll let me show you. Son, you are about to make a mistake you cannot take back.
Lady, if this really is your car, you can explain that to a judge.
She was 71 years old, dressed in a deep emerald gown she had sewn herself 30 years ago and altered every season since. And she had not moved so much as an inch toward anything that could be called threatening. 3 weeks earlier, she had walked out of Larkspur Memorial Hospital after a heart procedure her doctor still called delicate, still called serious, still told her to take slow. She had listened to every word of that advice, right up until tonight, when she decided that missing her own honor dinner was simply not on the table. "Officer, this is my car," she said, calm as still water. "I have the keys right here in my hand, and my registration is in the glove box, if you'll let me reach it. I don't care what's in your hand. Put it down and step back." Guests in tuxedos and sequined gowns slowed along the red carpet. Someone's phone rose, then another, then a dozen more, small glowing rectangles lifting into the night air like fireflies that had learned to judge. Officer Dale Ashworth's hand drifted to his belt. Not on the holster yet, just close enough to make a point. "Sir, if you'll let me show you." On the ground, hands where I can see them. The centerpiece box slipped from her arm and struck the pavement. Sugared almonds she had hand-tied into little lace pouches scattered across the driveway, rolling under the wheels of a Bentley idling 2 spots down, and one landing directly against the polished tip of Dale's boot, which he kicked away without so much as glancing down. Marguerite lowered herself slowly, her knees protesting, her chest tightening in a way she chose not to mention out loud, and pressed her palms flat against the cool hood of her own car. "Son," she said quietly, not with fear, but with something closer to pity, "you are about to make a mistake you cannot take back." He laughed, actually laughed, right there in front of 40 strangers, with their phones rolling. "Lady, if this really is your car, you can explain that to a judge. Cuff her." The cold metal closed around her wrists. One click, then another, pulled tighter than they needed to be. She winced. A small, sharp sound she swallowed almost as soon as it escaped. And somewhere in the crowd, a child's voice asked her mother why the police were being so mean to a grandma. Nobody answered the child. Nobody stepped forward either. And that is exactly the moment 3 black SUVs rolled up to the curb, lights off, engines humming low, 30 seconds too late to stop what had already happened, and just in time to witness the aftermath of it in full color. Before we go any further, and trust me, what happens next changes absolutely everything. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels before we're done. Now let's rewind 2 days before any of this happened, so you understand exactly who Marguerite Calloway really is, and why what's coming next is going to hit so much harder. 2 days earlier, in a modest brick house on the quiet end of Larkspur Avenue, Marguerite was doing what she did most mornings, which was nothing anyone would ever put in a headline. She watered the tomatoes on her back porch, the same 6 plants she'd nursed through frost every year since her husband passed. She called her neighbor Ruthie to remind her about a doctor's appointment. She sat at her sewing table, the same one she'd owned since 1987, its edges worn smooth by decades of careful hands, and finished hemming a choir robe for a boy at church who had shot up 4 inches since Easter and refused to admit his mother needed to buy him new clothes. She had spent 40 years as a seamstress, first on a factory line, later out of her own home, dressing brides and grieving widows and every shape of person in between, with the same quiet, unhurried care. She never advertised the fact that she paid 2 families' heating bills every winter under the cover of a fake charity envelope, or that she had once stood between a young mother and an abusive landlord, using nothing but a sharp tongue and a stubbornness that made men twice her size back down without ever raising her voice. Her son, Marcus, called her every single evening at exactly 7 o'clock, no matter where in the state his work had taken him that day. "You eat today, Mama?" "I always eat. You eat?" Working on it. Marcus Rain. That is not an answer. He laughed every time she used his full name like that, like she still had the power to send him to his room. In some ways, she still did. What she did not know was that in 2 days she would be receiving the Larkspur County Legacy and Service Award, an honor she had been nominated for without her knowledge by a young woman she had quietly mentored 30 years earlier, a woman who was now, of all things, a state senator. Marguerite believed she was simply attending a charity dinner as a guest, invited by an old church friend. She had no idea her name would be called from that stage. She had even less idea of what would happen to her before she ever reached the ballroom doors. The next evening, across town, a man named Denise Fairweather sat on her porch 2 doors down, watching her neighbor load a wrapped gift into the trunk of a car with narrowed, resentful eyes. Denise had spent years quietly stewing over small slights that existed mostly inside her own head, convinced that Marguerite's calm dignity was somehow a personal insult aimed directly at her. It did not help that Marguerite's tomatoes had won the neighborhood garden contest 4 years running, or that half the block still brought their hems to her, instead of the tailor shop Denise's cousin ran downtown. She picked up her phone. 911, what's your emergency? There's a woman loading something into a nice car on Larkspur Avenue. I don't think that car belongs to her. She looks nervous, keeps checking around like she doesn't want to get caught. I think you should send someone quick. Every word of it was invented. Every syllable was resentment dressed up as concern. Officer Dale Ashworth took the call before his partner could stop him. Dale was 34, sharply built, the kind of officer who mistook confidence for competence, and had been mistaking the two for over a decade. 3 prior complaints sat quietly in a folder somewhere in a records room nobody visited. Each one closed for lack of definitive evidence. Each closed file feeding the belief that he was untouchable. His partner, a soft-spoken but sharp-eyed officer named Rene Castillo, had learned over 2 years of riding with him to simply stay half a step behind and hope for the best. "You always assume the worst first," Rene told him once, over coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "I assume what the evidence tells me," Dale said. "You haven't looked at any evidence yet. You've looked at a phone call." He waved her off. He always did. That call sent him straight to the driveway on Larkspur Avenue that same evening, straight to a woman in a deep emerald gown, loading a small wrapped gift into her own trunk, keys already in her hand, running 12 minutes behind schedule for the most important night of the year. Which brings us back to where we started, on that red carpet, cuffs biting into her wrists, sugared almonds scattered across the pavement, and 3 black SUVs pulling up at the worst possible moment to witness the aftermath instead of preventing it. Officer Rene Castillo arrived only 90 seconds after Dale, stepping out of her cruiser to find the scene already spiraling. She saw the registration card, plainly visible in the open glove box. She saw the valet standing off to the side, practically vibrating with the need to speak. "Officer, please. She's a regular here. She comes every—" "Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns everybody," the valet muttered, but he stepped back anyway, the way people do when a badge tells them to. Renee crouched near the scattered contents of Marguerite's purse and found something Dale had already dismissed without a second look. A folded hospital discharge paper, dated 3 weeks earlier, the words "cardiac procedure" visible in plain black ink. "Dale," she said quietly, "she just had heart surgery. Look at this." Then, she should have stayed home instead of causing a scene. She's not the one causing a scene. He ignored her, same as always, and reached down to fold the registration card in half, tucking it into his jacket pocket, as though it were simply paperwork to be reviewed later, rather than proof standing directly in front of him. The crowd's reactions split in strange and uncomfortable directions. Some guests filmed in stunned silence. A few whispered that surely there had to be a reasonable explanation coming. One man near the back actually laughed, a short, ugly sound, before his date elbowed him hard enough to make him stop. Most people simply looked away, the particular kind of looking away that lets a person feel like a witness instead of a participant. Only one person moved. A young delivery driver named Theo Banks, still in his work vest, cutting through the hotel lot on his way to drop off a catering order, slowed his cart to a stop and stared at the scene in disbelief. "Sir, hold on a second," he called out, jogging closer. "You need to actually check her ID before you do anything else. Look, it's right there in her purse. Just check it. Step back, or you're next." Theo didn't step back, not all the way, but he didn't push further either. Caught in that same paralyzing space, so many bystanders find themselves trapped inside, wanting to help, and unsure exactly how far help is allowed to go before it becomes its own kind of trouble. Marguerite, cuffed now, cheek nearly resting against the cool hood of her own car, found something inside herself that had carried her through 71 years of moments just like this one, dressed in slightly different clothes. She did not scream. She did not fight the restraints digging into wrists that bruised more easily than they used to. She simply breathed, slow and deliberate, the way her cardiologist had taught her, and spoke. "I would like to make a phone call. I know that I am allowed one. You'll get your call downtown. I am asking for it now, officer, because my chest does not feel right, and I would like my son to know where I am before something happens that cannot be undone." For the first time, something flickered across Dale's face, quickly buried under the same certainty that had carried him this far. He turned away, radioing for a transport unit, ready to move her, without another word. It was Renee who finally broke. She waited until Dale stepped a few feet away to deal with the growing crowd, then crouched beside Marguerite and pulled out her own personal phone. "Ma'am, what's the number? Quick." Marguerite recited it without hesitation, the one number she had memorized so completely it lived somewhere below memory, somewhere closer to instinct. The call connected on the second ring. "Mama? You're late. I thought you'd already be." Marcus. Her voice, for the very first time all evening, cracked. "Marcus, I need you to come to the grand ballroom right now." Somewhere across town, inside a black SUV already moving toward that very address for an entirely different reason, State Police Commissioner Marcus Rain felt something in his chest go cold in a way 30 years of policing had never once managed to do. "Talk to me. What's happening? There's been a misunderstanding, baby. Just come." He did not wait for details. He gave one instruction to his driver, 4 words that emptied the vehicle of any conversation that had filled it moments before. "Larkspur Grand, now. Before we get to what happens when he arrives, and I promise you, it is worth every second of the wait, tell me again in the comments where you're watching this from tonight. I want this story reaching every single one of those places by the time we're finished." The SUVs pulled up to the curb at 8:47 that evening, engines humming low, and the man who stepped out of the middle vehicle wore a crisp navy uniform with a silver star pinned above his heart. He had been smiling only minutes earlier, running through the opening lines of a keynote address about community trust and accountability, lines that suddenly felt unbearably ironic given what was waiting for him on that red carpet. He did not walk toward the scene. He ran. "Get those cuffs off her, now." Dale turned, already annoyed at the interruption, opening his mouth to explain protocol to a man who very clearly outranked him by several galaxies. "Sir, I'm handling a suspected—" "That is my mother." The words landed like a physical blow. Guests who had been filming in curious silence now filmed in stunned silence. Dale's hand, still resting near his belt out of habit, dropped to his side like it had lost all purpose in the space of 4 syllables. Marcus knelt beside her, before the cuffs were even fully off, cradling her wrists, his voice cracking in a way a room full of strangers had clearly never once heard from him. "Mama, did he hurt you? Look at me. Did he hurt you?" "I'm all right, baby," she whispered, though her eyes were wet now, the first tears she had allowed herself all night. "I'm all right. My chest is just tight. I want to sit down." He caught her before her knees fully buckled, lowering her gently onto the curb, shouting for paramedics who were already sprinting from a catering truck that had, by pure coincidence, been parked with medical supplies for an unrelated event down the block. Only once she was settled, oxygen mask secured, color slowly returning to her face, did Marcus rise to his full height and turn toward Dale Ashworth, who suddenly looked much smaller than he had 10 minutes earlier. "Explain to me," Marcus said, voice low, controlled, more dangerous for its calm than any shout could have been, "why a woman with a documented cardiac procedure, a valid registration sitting in her own glove box, and hotel staff actively confirming her identity, is currently on the ground in handcuffs outside a charity event." "Sir, I responded to a call describing—" "A call from who?" Dale hesitated. "A concerned neighbor." "Did you verify a single detail of that call before acting on it?" Silence answered for him. 28 years earlier, a lonely 15-year-old boy named Marcus had lost both of his parents within 6 months of each other, one to illness, one to an accident that never quite made sense to anyone who investigated it. He drifted through school like a ghost, sitting alone at lunch, answering teachers in single-clipped words, one bad decision away from disappearing into the system entirely. Marguerite worked the cafeteria line back then, a job she had taken after the sewing factory closed its doors, and she noticed him the way she noticed everyone who needed noticing and quietly believed no one saw them at all. She started saving him an extra roll, then a second plate on Fridays, no questions asked, no explanation offered. Then she began staying 20 minutes after her shift ended, helping him with homework at a sticky lunch table while the janitor mopped in slow circles around them. She never asked what had happened to his parents. She never made him talk about pain he wasn't ready to name out loud. She simply showed up, again and again, until showing up became its own kind of language spoken quietly between the two of them. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked her once, maybe 6 months in, suspicious the way hurt kids often are, of kindness offered with no strings attached. "Because somebody did it for me once," she said, not looking up from the paperwork she was quietly filling out on his behalf. "And I never forgot how it felt to be seen." He graduated high school by the narrowest of margins. She helped him fill out his police academy application at that same sticky table, now transplanted into her own kitchen instead, the same table where he would later do homework with his own daughter. The day he graduated the academy, in full uniform for the very first time, he found her in the crowd before he found anyone else, wrapped his arms around her, and said the words that had defined every single year since. "You'll always be my mom." She never let him call her anything else, not once, not even in front of superiors, not even tonight, standing on a red carpet with her wrists still marked red from cuffs that should never have touched them. The next morning, Marcus ordered every piece of evidence preserved before he had finished his first cup of coffee. Body camera footage from both officers, hotel surveillance from every possible angle. All 41 videos guests had already begun uploading to social media overnight, several of which had crossed 200,000 views by sunrise. Every witness statement, starting with the valet who had tried to speak up and been silenced, and continuing through Theo Banks, the delivery driver who had come forward on his own the moment he saw the story trending. What the footage revealed was worse than even Marcus expected. Dale had never once looked at the registration sitting in plain view. He had dismissed a direct statement from hotel staff confirming Marguerite as a longtime guest of over a decade. He had folded and pocketed a valid document rather than examine it. And buried in his personnel file, 3 prior complaints that had quietly gone nowhere suddenly looked far less like isolated incidents and far more like a pattern nobody had bothered connecting until now. A few days later, 2 more people came forward. A young man said Dale had detained him for nearly 20 minutes over a broken taillight that turned out to be perfectly functional. An elderly woman said he had searched her bag on a public sidewalk without ever once explaining why he had the right to. Neither had filed a formal complaint before. Both gave the same answer when asked why. Who was going to believe me over him? At the disciplinary hearing, held in a small windowless room that suddenly felt enormous under the weight of what was being decided inside it, Dale sat across from a panel that included Marcus, arms crossed, letting the mounting evidence speak instead of his own simmering anger. "I was following my instincts," Dale said, when finally asked to explain himself for the record. "Your instincts told you a 71-year-old woman, recovering from heart surgery, standing beside her own vehicle, holding her own keys, with her registration in plain sight, required physical restraint," Marcus said, his voice level, controlled, far more devastating in its calm than rage could ever have managed. "Your instincts have been wrong before. 3 times by my count, possibly more. Nobody stopped to ask why until a phone call happened to reach the right person." Dale had no answer. For the first time in his 10-year career, the silence in that room did not belong to somebody else. He was suspended pending termination that same week. The department opened a full review of every prior complaint filed against him, and against 2 other officers whose names surfaced in that same quiet pattern once people finally felt safe enough to speak without fear of being dismissed. Marguerite, released from the hospital 2 days after her brief admission for observation, sat down with a reporter from the local paper and said something that traveled further than the arrest footage itself. "An apology means nothing without change behind it," she said. "Fear and prejudice are not born in a person. They are taught, slowly, over years. And what is taught can also be untaught if people are brave enough to sit still long enough to learn something new. I do not want vengeance against that young man. I want the next grandmother, who does not have a son with a silver star, to never have to lie on the hood of her own car, wondering if tonight is the night nobody comes." She asked, specifically, for 3 things. Mandatory verification steps before any detention involving a claimed vehicle owner. An independent civilian review board for any officer with more than 1 prior complaint. And cameras that stayed on, always, with real consequences attached to anyone caught tampering with them. A few weeks later, the charity gala she never properly got to attend was held again, this time with her name printed on every program handed out at the door. She walked onto that stage in a new gown, a soft dove gray she had sewn herself in the 2 weeks since the incident, because sitting idle had never once suited her, heart procedure or otherwise. The room rose to its feet before she even reached the podium, the applause rolling on so long she had to raise a single hand and laugh softly, asking them please to stop before she cried her makeup clean off her face. Marcus gave the closing remarks that night, standing just beside her, his voice steady until it very much wasn't. "People look at this uniform," he said, touching the star pinned above his heart, "and they think it tells them who I am. It doesn't. It never did." He turned to her. "The woman standing next to me is the one who actually built the man wearing it, 1 extra roll at a time, at a lunch table nobody else ever thought to sit at." The applause that followed lasted even longer than the first. When it finally quieted, Marguerite leaned toward the microphone, her voice small, but entirely unshaken. "Do not measure a person by the car they drive, or the clothes on their back, or how tired their hands look after a long life," she said. "Measure them by what they do when nobody is watching, and by what they teach the ones who happen to be." She reached for Marcus's hand. He took it the way he had every single time since he was 15 years old, and utterly alone in a cafeteria that quite suddenly had stopped being lonely at all. In the months that followed, the county quietly adopted every policy she had asked for, and a few she had not thought to request, but welcomed anyway, including a program that paired new recruits with community mentors before they were ever handed a badge. Theo Banks, the young delivery driver who had spoken up when almost no one else did, was invited to sit on the new Civilian Review Board, the very first of its kind in the state, recognized publicly for a courage he insisted was simply common decency that shouldn't have needed recognizing at all. Dale Ashworth lost his certification permanently, barred from law enforcement anywhere in the state. What almost no one expected was what happened 6 months later, when Marguerite asked to meet with him privately. No cameras, no reporters, just the two of them and a pot of tea in her small kitchen on Larkspur Avenue. She did not shout at him. She did not need to. She told him, plainly, what it had felt like to grow up in a world that had taught people like him to see people like her a certain way before either of them had said a single word to the other. She told him healing was possible, but only for the people willing to actually do the uncomfortable work of it. He left that kitchen a different man than he arrived, not fixed, not forgiven in any easy way, but pointed, for the first time, in a direction that might eventually lead somewhere better. A year later, Marguerite's case became the foundation of a new training standard, adopted first by Larkspur County, and then, quietly, by 3 neighboring counties who saw the same pattern beginning to shift once accountability actually had teeth behind it. Officers were shown the footage, not as a cautionary tale about one bad night, but as a lesson in every single decision leading up to it. All the smaller moments where someone could have paused, could have asked one more question, could have simply looked down at the registration sitting in plain sight. Marguerite still waters her tomatoes every morning. She still hems choir robes for boys who refuse to admit they've outgrown their clothes. She still answers the phone every evening at 7 o'clock sharp, and it is still, without fail, her son on the other end, checking that she has eaten, still calling her mama in a voice that has never once needed correcting. If this story reached you tonight, the way it reached me while writing it, tell me one more time in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And stay close, because stories exactly like this one are the reason this channel exists at all.